Welcome back to Uninformed Summary. This podcast where four friends sit together, talk about impact of special, amazing Russian victory and how it totally radically make history better for all. Today in Hot Seat, the special professor, Matt. Say hello, Matt.
I want to say hello in Russian, but I don't know what the word is. Hello.
Matt, tell us all about Battle of Stalingrad and amazing Russian victory. Lower down in research levels are the rest of the pros in charge of maintaining order in this podcast. Starting, of course, with myself. My name is Vinny. Hello. Directly after me in research levels is Molly.
That one sounded a little,
No, commit to the bit. You gotta do the Russian thing. We won.
hello. Very
Yeah.
nice to be here.
Privyet.
And last but not least is Dunce Scott, who knows nothing.
Say Privyet, Scott.
Привет. Что? I'm very glad to be here with you.
This is by far the best we've ever done to commit to the bit. So take it away from the hot seat, Matt. The Battle of Stalingrad.
Hi, my name's Matt. I'm in the hot seat. Today we're talking about Battle of Stalingrad. Other people did other levels of research that I do not remember. Who's clueless today?
That's me.
Scott is clueless. Who is slightly less clueless?
Molly.
Molly is slightly less clueless. That means Vinny is the least clueless.
That's true, and not the most clueful. This one was a dense read for me because the battle was so long. Why can't battles just be one day, Matt?
Yeah, this one is like, geez, I'm going to start in the middle of 1941 and we're not going to, or in 42, and we're not going to finish up till like January, February 43. So to call this one continuous battle is a little bit of a misnomer. It's more like part of a campaign, but the fact that it is so centered on one geographic objective is why it's known as the Battle of Stalingrad. So, yeah.
Was this the one where Hitler did so good on the first Blitzkrieg that he's like, I'm just going to do it again, and we're going to do it in Russia?
Yeah, basically. And that leads right into my background point. So I do want to go all the way back to that first invasion of Russia back in 1941 that Vinny's alluding to, in what was called Operation Barbarossa. Summer of 1941, Hitler finally unleashes his army on the Soviet Union, which was, his main goal all along was to invade the Soviet Union and capture all this living space for the German people. And it went really, really well, at least at first. They captured hundreds of thousands of square miles of Soviet territory. It took hundreds and thousands of prisoners of war. Like literally, I think it was like 600,000 prisoners of war that summer or something like that. And the Germans were convinced that like that, that was it. No army could take those kind of losses and continue to function. But the Soviet army did. They were stopped just short of Moscow. And the Soviets counterattacked, pushed them back in places, and it kind of stalemated throughout the winter. So in 1942 rolls around, and Germany still has the initiative. Russia's still kind of fighting for their lives and just trying to hold the Germans off. So they come up with a plan for what their summer offensive is going to be for 1942, the Germans, that is. And Hitler decides that he wants to strike south this time. Instead of trying to take Moscow, which is what he kind of expects that the Russians think he'll do, he says that, we'll try and be a little bit unexpected and go south, with the main goal being to capture the oil fields in the Caucasus Mountains, because Germany... Yeah, exactly. And Germany is short on oil. It's a problem throughout the war that Germany doesn't have access to any oil, and you need oil for tanks and planes. So they figured they will take Russia's oil.
Wait a minute. We already built the tank. Tank could go now. Do the war. Yeah. Why the oil?
Because you need gas.
Damn it.
As we talked about in the D-Day episode, tanks get terrible gas mileage, so you need quite a bit of gasoline, in fact. And Germany had a bunch stored up at the beginning of the war, but they're basically running out at this point. And they're trying some stopgap solutions like synthetic fuels and stuff like that. But really, they need a source of oil, and so they decide to go for the Caucasus Mountains. And initially, Stalingrad was part of that plan. If you look at a map, Stalingrad is kind of on the left flank of any attempt to move south, and it's right on the Volga River. So if you could take Stalingrad, it would be a nice anchor for your left flank that you could continue your drive into the Caucasus. So it's
Right.
part of the plan, but it was not like a major goal.
It's
And-
kind of like if I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah,
it's like
no, go for
it's
it.
also like if the Russians attacked Hitler Town, there's like a motive to sort of defend it because it's like leader
Yeah.
town.
Yeah.
If
Yeah,
someone
that's-
came to Americaville and they were going to invade it, I think most
Mhm.
Americans would be like, maybe not. Maybe we
Yeah.
don't let them do that.
I'm going to write a strongly worded letter.
Dear German offensive, your actions have harmed us in the following ways.
If you continue to harm us in this way, we will take the following actions. Yeah, so the German plan to strike south, which is called Case Blue, starts on June 28th. And initially it goes well, just like kind of a repeat of 1941. The Germans are breaking through lines. They're capturing cities rapidly. They're capturing large numbers of Soviet prisoners of war. And they think, okay, great, we're being successful. We're going to be successful in what we do. So they're successful in that initial phase. And then Hitler makes what some people would argue is his first mistake. He splits Army Group South, which is the army group that's in charge of Case Blue, into two army groups. Army Group A would continue to drive to the oil fields, which was the original goal. Army Group B would capture Stalingrad. So Army Group B heads towards Stalingrad, and on August 23rd, they reach the outskirts of Stalingrad. And by the end of August, the city was fully encircled, except for the crossing from the other side of the Volga River, which was what they couldn't close off. So the whole city if you picture is like a half moon with the river as the flat side, and the Germans had the moon part completely surrounded, but the Soviets were still able to bring stuff in by ferrying it across the river.
Had that home field advantage. They had that artillery posted up on the eastern side of that, right? The eastern side.
Yeah, and it was in like
it
was like at a bend of the river, because a lot of people say, well, why didn't they just cross the river and cut off the river access? And it's because the way it was positioned, like maybe we can put up a map or something, but the part where the supplies were coming in was surrounded by like the Volga River, because Stalingrad's in a bend in the river.
Listeners, imagine a map. Think about it. Now you're there.
Yeah. Yeah, just look at a map of Stalingrad. You'll understand what I'm saying.
Well, I have a question, because I'm the person with the least amount of awareness.
Yeah.
Was this the battle in which is this the start of where they turned on Russia, the Soviets, or was that a pre-battle that this is now the height of that?
When the Germans turned on the Soviets?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what Operation Barbarossa was. Yeah, they initially had a treaty called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Treaty, and they had a non-aggression pact. They split up Poland and agreed not to attack each other for the first part of the war.
What was the name of that treaty one more time?
The Molotov-Ribbentrop.
Oh, it's a Swedish candy.
It's named after the two people that that signed it. The Soviet foreign minister's name was Molotov, and the German, I forget what his title was Ribbentrop. And fun fact, Molotov is who the Molotov cocktail is named after.
I was going to ask you that. So
in my head.
It stuck right out, and I had to ask. So
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Operation Barbarossa was Hitler stabbing the Russians in the back and breaking that pact and starting this war. Yeah,
another cool move by Hitler.
Yeah, Hitler known for keeping his word and being a stand-up guy.
Oh man, what went wrong?
Yeah. So by September, the city was surrounded, and the fighting had kind of devolved into this intense small unit urban warfare, for which that's the image in most people's heads for Stalingrad. It's just like this brutal urban fighting, right? And
house to house, right? They're like shooting
house to house, sometimes room to room and floor to floor. I'm gonna get into some examples, but there were buildings where the Germans would hold the first and second floor, but the Russians would still be on the third and fourth floor.
This is part of this is okay, I'm gonna go a little deep. because
Uh-huh.
I felt like if we were talking about this long battle, it's like the city itself is really big,
Yeah.
Stalingrad,
Uh-huh.
and there's these like sectors of the city. So one of the reasons I think that this happened, if I'm onto it right, is the
Cool.
first thing that happened was Germans just bombed the crap out of it.
They did,
And
yeah.
the initial bombing run killed like days and weeks, like all this bombing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
40,000 casualties, mostly civilian.
Yeah.
So
One
keep in
thing that
mind,
Stalin
while
did
this-
was
yeah,
I'm sorry, just to add on to that. One thing Stalin did was he forbade the civilians from leaving.
yes, that
Nobody really
order
knows why.
227. Yeah, he just like
Yeah.
makes this order where he's like, don't fucking retreat or I'll kill you.
Yeah, and civilians too, not just his own, not just soldiers, but civilians. He forbade any civilians from evacuating, even knowing that there's going to be this big battle.
I think I wonder if I know why. Like, didn't Hitler go on the radio that summer and he was like, "Oh yeah, we're doing great out there, and we're gonna totally win. But before we do, maybe we drop by Stalingrad and get in there."
Yeah.
And so he basically assured the German population, like over the radio, that eventually they were gonna take it, and he would like continually do that, right? Like, kind of give
Mhm.
updates.
Yeah,
So I
for sure.
think that's one of the things, man. And Stalin's like, "We'll see."
Yeah, and some people say like maybe Stalin thought that the soldiers would fight harder if like there were civilians still in the city. Like maybe they wouldn't fight for a deserted city, but if there's still people living there, maybe they'll fight harder or something like that. But like you said, the end result is that there were tons of civilian casualties in this battle
Yeah.
because these people were just trapped in the city with this, apocalyptic battle going on around them, which is just horrible.
I think that might have been why I was alluding to the inevitability of this like close quarters skirmishing, because it's like, okay, what are we gonna do? Leave the city? No, because that's when the planes show up and start
Mhm.
bombing us. And then if we leave the other way, the people who lead us shoot us. So I
Mhm.
guess we just dig these trenches and fight. And they like handed men, like less abled men and like women and children, like, here's the tools to dig trenches, and you're gonna dig
Uh-huh.
these tank traps. And
Yep.
yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, and so part of it is that the Soviets realized that this was like a fight that they were either had the advantage or at least were on even terms with the Germans. Like the Germans were really good at mobile warfare and these, what people call blitzkrieg, which is kind of like a myth, but what it is like mobile warfare, with tanks breaking holes in lines, encircling people, capturing large numbers of troops, stuff like that. But where the Germans weren't so good was in close quarters fighting, which so the Russians kind of realized that if they could suck the Germans into this close quarters fight, they'd either have the advantage or at least be equal. And here's some examples from this kind of warfare. The grain elevator is one famous battle within this battle. There's this concrete grain elevator in one part of Stalingrad, and there was about 40 Soviets that were holed up in there, and they held out for 5 days. They held up, I think it was like a battalion or two, which is like hundreds of people. These 40 guys held them up because they had this big, tall grain elevator that commanded their surrounding area. And they held out for 5 days, and they only surrendered when they ran out of food and water and ammunition. And then another one is, yeah. And then another one was called Pavlov's house. And again, we're talking about one platoon. So this is really like small scale warfare. Platoons like maybe 25, 30 guys. So
Quick
there's a
question.
platoon. Yeah.
I think I know what happens. Did the guy ring a bell and then feed the soldiers, and then they started to get used to it, and then that's how they got him?
I think this is a different Pavlov.
Okay.
Not 100% sure. This is
Are you
this is
guys
Yakov Pavlov. I'm not
salivating?
sure. I don't know. Maybe he was related. I'm not sure. I have to
So
check
there's-
I'd have to check the research, but I don't know if any dogs were involved or not. But yeah, Pavlov's house. Under Sergeant Pavlov, this platoon basically turned this 4-story house into a fortress. They surrounded it with mines and barbed wire. They dug tunnels through the basement so that, like, if the Germans attacked one side, they could move around without being shot at, and switch sides without being able to be shot at. And they fortified this thing so hard that on the German maps of Stalingrad, it was literally labeled fortress. And this one platoon held that house for 2 months without being relieved.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is 2 months past August 23rd, right, when they start their advance.
Yeah, this is still like September, October, mostly. And let's see some other examples. There's a famous tractor factory in Stalingrad, and they kept the factory floor running while the battle was raging around it. Like tanks would roll off the assembly line straight into the battle.
Yep,
Yeah.
Like,
they're unpainted, no gun
yeah,
sights.
uh-huh. But it was so
I
close, you
got
don't need a
one.
gun sight. Yeah, go for it.
I got one. And here's a remember when in Stalingrad. So they had these untrained soldier corps of like volunteer citizens, right? That volunteer, not really, but they would train these like women and younger soldiers too, but a lot of women, go ladies. They would have them on these machine gun teams, and then anti-aircraft guns. And famously, they would in this invasion turn the anti-aircraft guns down, and they like shot at vehicles, land vehicles, and tanks and half tracks and shit, and they were just blowing German land vehicles up with these anti-aircraft guns, and they got good with the anti-aircraft guns too, and they were shooting planes down. Like,
yeah, the Soviet army was much more egalitarian than as far as gender stuff than any other army in World War II. They let women serve in combat roles all the time. Like you said, anti-aircraft gunners, there were pilots, there were female snipers, all kinds of roles. Women served in the Red Army during World War II. So that's a good thing to bring up. And the last example of just how brutal this fighting that I wanted to bring up was the casualty rates. So the 13th Guards Rifle Division, there's about 10 or 11,000 people in it at the beginning of the battle. And the first 24 hours of fighting, they took 30% casualties. So that's like 4,000 people in one day out of this division of 10,000 people. And that's just in the first day. And that was in basically one battle over a railway station that changed hands 14 times during that one day.
Yeah, I was gonna have to bring this up if you didn't. I mean, come on, one day, it's like a Call of Duty match where they just keep spawning over and over and over.
And then by the end of the battle, out of those 10,000 people that started out in the 13th Guards Rifle Division, there were 320 left in Stalingrad. That's it. It's like the whole division just wiped out.
They said one source of research, it was a video documentary, and the average lifespan of a soldier on the field in that battle over time was calculated at about a day. So like if you participated and lived and died, on average it was like a day of engagement, you'd be dead. That's how fast reinforcements were being pulled in on both sides, and armor, like Matt was saying, armor is being built to order. Even planes, like they had these Russian planes that would later like enter the battle, the flying tank planes, or like specifically built like not that far away, and just like get it up in the air, get it in there, get it to the fight.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the Soviets, like I said, were really good at this. They had a lot. They were really innovative in the way that they did this urban warfare. They converted every major building into a fortress, like I talked about Pavlov's house. But the basic idea was repeated hundreds of times in any building that had good lines of sight, or was like sturdily built. Like part of the reason that Stalingrad was so hard to take was that it was a really industrial city, and industrial buildings are really sturdy and easy to defend. And then they also had a tactic called hugging the Germans, quote unquote. And that just meant that, except it's actually not cute at all. But what the Germans like to do is if they ran up against resistance, they like to fall back and use artillery to try and soften up the enemy. Well, what the Soviets quickly realized was don't let them do that. If they fall back, you follow them back. So that way, if they ever you stay too close to them so that you can't call in artillery, because then you risk hitting your own guys. So the Soviets just always made sure that their lines were like right on top of the Germans, and never really gave them a break or a chance to call in fire support like that. And they were also big on sniping and night attacks. Basically, their whole thing was just never let the Germans have time to rest or to plan an assault. Just never give them a break. And the most famous Soviet sniper that you might have heard of is Vasily Zaitsev, and he finished he's the guy in whatchamacallit, Enemy at the Gates. If you've seen Enemy at the Gates.
Someone had to say it, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
beautiful movie.
it's not the worst war movie. I mean, it's not great, but it's not the worst. And Mr. Zaitsev finished the Battle of Stalingrad with 225 confirmed kills, which is not a bad score.
Yeah, it's a good KDR for you gamers out there.
Yeah, 225 and 0.
This would stack up well against some of the other female snipers, but I think when they scored, there were like not, you alluded to egalitarianism. Yep, like lady snipers would take just amazing amounts of kills, and the field craft like of the Soviets, like you said, like they're camouflaging in urban environment / nature environment. Like they had all the cool skins.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Well, you saying that they were being relentless in their, like not giving them a chance to really formulate much of anything. Very similar to like the no huddle kind of offense of
yeah, absolutely. That's a good
Nice.
football analogy because
Reference.
it's if the defense was able to no huddle, right? Like, so the Soviets were playing on defense. Think if the defense could no huddle the offense. So you can never get a play in. You can never bring in subs. You just have to, go by the seat of your pants. And it's just like a continuous battle that doesn't really stop. And it would make it incredibly hard to execute any kind of offense under those circumstances. And that's pretty much what happened to the Germans.
Yeah, their supplies started running out, right?
Yeah, that too. But despite all that, I know it sounds like the Germans are getting their asses kicked by what we've been talking about for the last few minutes, but the Germans were actually slowly grinding forward. You heard the losses that me and Vinny talked about, and so the Soviets just were running out of people at a certain point, and the Germans were slowly grinding forward, house by house, floor by floor. By 20th of November, the Germans had reached the Volga River, and they'd cut the Soviet bridgehead in half. So like they pushed through the middle of Stalingrad and cut it into two halves. And then they controlled about 90% of what was left of the city at that point. And so the Germans were like almost there. They were on the brink of capturing Stalingrad. But the reason that they were able to do that and the reason that the Soviets were kind of running out of people is because the Soviets were preparing a giant counterattack. And the Germans were completely oblivious to it. Stalingrad had basically become a trap that the Germans had been grinding their way into for the last couple of months. So because of the high casualties, after months of this laser focus on taking the city, which had, like you said, Vinny, taken on this kind of symbolic struggle because it was called Stalingrad. The Russians didn't want to let it fall. Hitler wanted it to fall so he could say he took Stalin City. So they were so focused on the city, they'd been stripping troops out off the flanks everywhere they could get more troops to put into Stalingrad. And so they had left the flanks defended mostly by their allied nation troops. So like Italians, Hungarians, Romanians. And, this comes up a lot. It's not that they were bad troops, and it's not that they weren't as good as the Germans, but they just weren't as well equipped for the most part. And they were stretched super thin to protect these flanks. In some places, a single platoon, which we talked about before, was like about 30 guys, defended fronts of like 1 or 2 kilometers.
Come on.
I mean,
indefensible. That's
it's insane, right? Like the minute somebody tries to attack that with any kind of concentration, they're going to break through instantly. I mean, you just can't. So on 19th November, the first blow fell, and this was on the northern flank. And this attack on the southeastern flank came about a day later. And I mean, it was so thinly held, like I just said, that they broke through immediately. And in only 3 days, on November 23rd, both arms of the Soviet attack had met in the middle, completely encircling the 6th Army in Stalingrad, which was about 270,000 men of the 6th Army in the area surrounding Stalingrad were completely surrounded, cut off from supplies.
Checkmate.
Yeah.
So the 6th Army surrenders instantly, right? Because they know they've been had.
Well, not exactly, Vinny.
Why, did something happen?
Yeah. There's this guy named Hitler, and he is known for taking prudent and logical courses of action. So, of course, he told everybody to try and get out of the trap immediately, right? No, he didn't. he told
No,
him,
he's on the radio in Germany. He's like, no, seriously, it's going super well. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's good.
yeah, he told them to keep trying to capture what was left of the city, and he'd get them out of it. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, he said he was going to send airdrop supplies. Well, I'm going to resupply you from the Luftwaffe, which was notably and like loudly unable to do that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So
wild.
so they did make preparations to try and relieve the trapped forces. They wouldn't let the trapped forces try and retreat or break out of the encirclement, but they did prepare. They brought forces in to try and attack, the part that the Soviets had surrounded them with, try and break through the Soviet circle and reopen supply lines into the city. But in the meantime, like Vinny said, they were going to try and supply it by air. Hermann Goring said, no problem, the Luftwaffe can do it. We got this. The Sixth Army said they needed about 700 tons of supplies per day. 700 tons. But the best the Luftwaffe ever did was 262, and that was on one day. Their average was 85 tons out of 700 tons that the
Bro,
Sixth
so-
Army needed.
So their supplier, the person, the person supplying that, is that Rick from Pawn Stars?
Yeah, I guess. Best I can do is 85
Best I
tons.
can do. You're toasting me right now with 86. And those are fine German tons. I'm going to get a third party in here. He's going to figure out how many tons we can put on the plane.
I got a supply guy. I'm going to call him.
I can just picture Hitler on the radio like, no, they're sending millions of tons, I think. Yeah, no, probably too many. If there's any problem over there, it's too many supplies. Oh. He's just really worried,
Yeah.
It wasn't going well here, guys. It was not going well for Army 6.
Yeah, and
of
the
Germany.
kind of the cherry on the top of the shit sundae is that this ill-gotten or ill-fated effort to resupply them by the air also cost the Germans 488 planes that were shot down, because once the Soviets realized what they were trying to do, of course they pulled every anti-aircraft gun in the area they could onto the supply routes, because there was only like one functioning airfield left inside Stalingrad, so they knew where they were going to land, and it was just a turkey shoot anytime a supply plane tried to get through.
Just the level of attrition here, and
Yeah.
like we're talking about it in our safe little houses
Mhm.
over the internet. Nice.
Duck
Good one.
hunt.
Nice smells. Nope, it's staying.
Yeah, of course. And so, I mean, like, just thinking about a month-long siege on your city, I get tired after my run goes a little longer than planned. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
what if I just took a day off next time? Like, no, you can't. It's been months of airplanes and bombs and gunfire. Oh,
Yeah, I mean, by the end of this thing, people are going to be on rations of you're talking about grams of bread per day, or ounces of bread per day is what you're getting to eat, and it's freezing cold on top of that. The Russians are constantly attacking you on top of that, so people are getting very little sleep. There's no medical supplies. Of course, everybody's getting sick because they're weakened and it's cold outside and there's no shelter and you haven't slept in days. So it's just yeah, it's unimaginable how brutal this thing was when you get to the end.
yeah.
So by December 18th, the relief operation was not going well. The Russians knew that the Germans were going to do this. They knew they were going to try and break back in. So they prepared for that. So they dug in and received this attack, and the Germans were not making very good progress. And on December 18th, Erich von Manstein, which is the commander in the area, pleaded with Hitler to order the Sixth Army to break out to try and meet the rescuers that were coming for them, to try and get some people out. And Hitler refused. Still, he says they've got to stay. They're gonna fight and die where they are if you can't get to them. And at this point, historians are split on whether or not it would have made a difference, because Sixth Army was starving at this point, like I just said, and they might have been too weak to even break out at this point. And then 5 days later, Manstein gave up on even trying to reach Sixth Army and went over to the defensive himself, because the Russians were counterattacking him, and his troops were in danger of being encircled as well, making this an even bigger disaster. So he had to go over to the defensive.
But
So
it was going to be fine, because
Yeah, it's gonna be fine.
Christmas, and we would just forget about the fight, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
But by then, the fate of Sixth Army was sealed. There's no hope at this point. And It's just how long it's going to take. On January 7th, so again, we're in 1943 now. Like you said, this thing stretches on for a while. On
over
January
it.
7th, the Soviets, they actually offered General Paulus, who's the leader of Sixth Army, pretty generous surrender terms. They promised everyone safety, food, medical care for all the troops. They could keep their personal belongings, and they would be repatriated after the war. Paulus was like, "This sounds great." Asked Hitler for permission to accept, but was denied. Vinny?
God, that track
Yeah.
record.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's trying to imagine having all those men under your control, like
Right.
your command rather. Like that's a responsibility. And so
It is.
I was researching this and I was watching these marches of the Sixth Army surrendering when it's all done so far, right? Up to this point, you get these visuals of like intense fighting, and then you see the surrender walks, like the perp walks of these POWs. They look nice.
I'm sorry.
No, it's a theme. Or did they? No, so these POWs look kind of relieved in this old war footage. I'm not even lying. Like
No, I would be.
you can see it in some of their faces. They're getting cigarettes handed to them and like food. And so there's this humanizing moment, I think, that I don't want to skip here. Where like I saw
Yeah.
this. I was thinking we do Battle of Stalingrad research, and it's like, oh yeah, they're both sides are like fuck the other one no matter what. But we forget that, you can look into another person's eye and be like, oof, you're starving and, it's over. Come on.
Yeah, and General Paulus knew that. He knew there was no
Yeah.
hope. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
So
his
did the
men
Russians.
were so weak. Like how many Russians were they even going to kill by, persisting in this pointless battle? They're starving. There's no medical care for his men. Like he knew it was pointless, and that's why he asked repeatedly for permission to accept these terms. On January 22nd, the offer was repeated, and Paulus again radioed Hitler and pleaded for permission to accept it. He was out of food. He was out of ammo. They were out of even bandages for the wounded. So, like, forget medicine. They didn't even have any bandages for the wounded. And Hitler's reply was to order him to resist to the last bullet, quote unquote.
That's tough, man. Yeah, where they had to like cut up their uniforms and stuff to like make enough. Yeah.
In winter, when you kind of need your uniform to not die of hypothermia.
It's almost like Hitler was like bombed out on meth or something, too far away from reality to make rational decisions.
That is one theory. Read Blitzed. It's an excellent book.
Suggesting for a friend. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of ties into what my question was going to be is, did Hitler know that it's clearly a lost cause, or is he still under the assumption, does he know it's a lost cause and he's doing it just because, fuck it, we're not coming back like that? Or is it that, he thinks that there's actually a chance?
Well, it's a matter of debate, and here's the complicating factor and some background information that we did gloss over earlier when we were talking about the earlier part of the war. So one thing that happened was when they were on the brink of taking Moscow. Remember, I told you they got stopped short of Moscow, and then the Russians or Soviets counterattacked them. What the German generals wanted to do, typically what you do in the face of a counterattack, standard military wisdom, is that you fall back to like a good defensive position. You give up ground to gain time and to gain a better defensive position. And that's what the German commanders wanted to do. But Hitler was not having it. He did not want to give up any of the ground that they had gained. And so he issued a not one step back order and said, everybody holds where they are. They don't retreat. Even if you're under heavy attack, we're going to hold what we got. And it worked, is the problem. It was successful. The Germans were able to stop these attacks, and they did not end up losing a whole lot of ground. They took heavy casualties, but they kept the ground. And so, one argument to be made is that when it came around to Stalingrad, Hitler was like, oh, well, it worked last time, not letting people retreat. So if I just order him to not retreat this time, maybe it will work again.
Well, I'm sure he would never make that mistake again.
I keep saying that Hitler has like one move.
Yeah.
If you play a fighting game with Hitler, you know the combo before it comes. You can just be like, I'm going to counter this and throw. You're so boring, Hitler.
Yeah. And the problem with Hitler was like that he thought he was better than he was. And he would ignore all the times that his, micromanaging didn't work out. But then when it did work, he'd be like, yeah, but remember remember the winter counterattack when I was right? Like that worked.
Right.
So
Anybody
and
else?
yeah,
Guys?
yeah, exactly. So he, his generals for the most part were really competent, and they did a lot of amazing things, like we just talked about in the early parts of the war. But then whenever things went bad, he blamed the generals and thought he knew better or whatever. So it's long story short, it's a matter of debate whether or not Hitler realized how big this disaster was and whether or not telling them that they couldn't try and break out was dooming them, or whether or not he actually thought that maybe it would work out. It's really hard to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you opened up a can of worms, Scott.
No, I mean,
My thesis is Hitler had to, like, this was a desperate move, right? Like, this was oil
Yeah.
needed that, got to check the box. And then also
Mhm.
there's this, I've been building a subtext of there's propaganda to prop up back home.
Yep.
And like, I think those two things operate simultaneously to pressure Hitler to at least put the facade of victory on this.
Yeah. That's part
right.
of like a totalitarian regime, right? Is like you can't
Got to dress
have
it up a
losses.
little.
You can't have losses, right? Like
Yeah.
he doesn't want the newspapers reporting in 1941 that the Germans are being pushed back. He wants them to report that the Germans are heroically defending every inch of ground that they took and not giving an inch back to the Soviets, right? I mean, because that's a win. Whereas giving up ground and falling back is a loss, even if it's military sense, And so I think the same thing is with Stalingrad. If he was like on the verge of taking Stalingrad and winning this big symbolic victory, and he didn't want to, let anybody change the narrative into the fact that they were giving up and going back to where they started. So
Makes them look like a punk.
yeah. And you want to talk about propaganda? We get to January 30th, which is the anniversary of Hitler coming to power. And Hitler gets a call that he definitely doesn't want to take on the anniversary of him coming to power, which is Paulus again saying, "My men are literally collapsing of starvation and sickness. The Russians aren't even going to have to kill anybody because we're all just going to be dead from starvation and sickness." And so at this point, Hitler probably says, "Yeah, go ahead and surrender," right? That'd be the humane thing to do. Well, he doesn't.
Aw.
Instead, he promotes him to field marshal, from
Yeah.
general to field marshal. And the subtext of that move is that a German field marshal had never been captured in battle before. And Hitler's intention was for that trend to continue. So Paulus was supposed to either die fighting or commit suicide, is basically what that promotion meant.
Well, and best regards, the Führer. Yeah, I
But-
can't see that being a nice move. When you're Paulus and you open up that communique and you're like, okay, all right,
Worst promotion ever.
yeah. Well, somebody hand me a bottle of. Oh, we're out of everything. Okay, well, all right. Okay.
But Paulus kind of had the last laugh because on the next day, Paulus surrendered.
Yeah,
with,
take that.
with the entirety of what was left of Sixth Army. Of those 270,000 that were initially encircled, only 91,000 of them were left alive to march into Soviet POW camps. And of those 91,000 POWs, 22 of them were generals.
Hmm.
So not only did they capture a field marshal and 91,000 German troops, but they also captured 22 generals. So quite the prize for the Soviet Union.
That's an unboxing.
Yeah.
That's
Oh, look, more
remarkable.
God, how many generals are in here?
Oh man, this is a rare find. And they haven't all starved to death yet. I think the conditions were really appalling. Some of the Germans were like, so they're holed up in the city, right? And they're like, we need to have more fighting men to ward off the Russian pincer that's closing us in. And like the commanders for the German army are like ordering, people to go up in the attics where we're all hanging out because it's so fucking cold. Go grab more fighting soldiers. And they're like, look, we tried, but I can't. There's one German who recounts his experience in this documentary, and he's like, my commander told me to get more men, but I went upstairs and nobody could even stand up. We were so hungry.
Yeah.
It's like their guns worked and like their helmets were still protecting their head, but their clothes didn't fit them because they were just falling out of them, like
Yeah.
starving to death. Like,
Yeah, and that's why Paulus surrendered. I mean, there's no point at that point, right? I mean, they're done.
you never
There's
think about that shit when you're playing Risk. Like your Risk
yeah,
pieces don't have to eat, and that's
right.
Hitler's problem, Scott. I think
Mhm. Yeah.
Hmm.
When he's in a bunker in, East Prussia, it's all just, pieces on a board, right? And you're like, "Oh, if we sacrifice 6th Army, maybe it buys time for everybody else or, whatever." But yeah, that's 300,000 human beings that you're talking about.
And 2/3 of them
Yeah,
done.
exactly.
Yeah, good
Um,
job, Hitler.
yeah. So moving on to the legacy, it takes us right into it. Most historians consider this to be the beginning of the end for Germany. Um, Kind of their high water mark. They captured a lot of the Caucasus oil fields. They almost captured Stalingrad, but in the end, they reached too far, and that Soviet trap was sprung, and they lost an entire field army of almost 300,000 men that they couldn't replace, and they never again would have the strategic initiative in the East. And
Huh.
the magnitude of the defeat, you want to talk about propaganda, was so huge that it
Yeah,
was
I do.
actually the first like publicly acknowledged defeat um, by the German state. Like the propaganda ministry got together and they're like, "Yeah, this is so huge. Like so many people's sons or husbands aren't coming back. We can't. It's impossible to paper over this thing." So instead, they did what good propagandists do and they spun it right. So they acknowledged that it was a defeat, and Goebbels gave his famous total war speech shortly after the surrender on 18th of February 1943, where he acknowledged the defeat at Stalingrad, admitting for the first time that Germany was actually in mortal danger of losing the war, and encouraged the students or the citizens of Germany to ready themselves for total war. And I'm going to read a quotation here, just so you can get a little bit of sense of this speech. This is from the total war speech. "Do you believe with the Fuhrer and us in the final total victory of the German people? Are you and the German people willing to work if the Fuhrer orders 10, 12, and if necessary, 14 hours a day, and to give everything for victory? Do you want total war? If necessary, do you want a war more total and radical than anything we can even imagine today?"
Wow.
Yeah.
What is it good for? I'm going to take a second to reflect on a part of that. I'm just going to pick it apart. 10, 12, 14 hours. That's describing a typical ass workday. So I guess they had it better in general back then.
Well, no, but that's part of the thing is like up until now, the Germans had never gone on war footing.
Yeah.
Little known fact, like, you think of World War II, you think of rationing and stuff. The Germans had not rationed anything up until this point. They had not made people do mandatory overtime at this point. They had not, you know, cut back on consumer goods or anything because Hitler wanted the German people to not have to feel the war that they were fighting. And it wasn't until after Stalingrad that they really started feeling that because they had to, because for the first time they were really in danger of losing.
It's a
Um,
good thing that Hitler's government was the last government to ever pull a stunt like that.
oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Nobody ever did it again.
Thank God.
So many of these stories, it's really encouraging to learn that after these horrible things in the past happened, we learned from them and they never happened again.
It's my favorite history quote.
Yeah.
History never repeats itself.
Yeah. Yeah. So this speech basically, in a nutshell, was that even though the writing was on the wall and that Germany, the high ups knew that the war was probably unwinnable at this point, they were going to go down with the ship and they were going to fight as hard as they could to the last bullet, just like Hitler wanted the people in Stalingrad to do. And even though on paper, German victory was impossible in early 1943, it was going to take another 26 months of bloody warfare before the Germans would surrender.
Oh, and that's when the Russians get to do the same. They get to return in kind, and they attack Hitlertown.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Siege, man. World War II siege. These kind of casualty numbers, these things that sort of become, what's the word? We start to become like inured to it, right? Like
Yeah, it's
you keep reading like 40,000 dead in a day, and it's like, okay.
yeah, it just boggles the mind, right? Like the numbers are so big that you can't even conceive of them. Like I'm just bringing up Wikipedia here. 16 million military dead and 45 million civilian dead in World War II.
World
So
War
that's
II
like
civilian death. Yeah, 3-1.
61 million total people died just like
But
in the decade 1937 to 1945. Not even a whole decade.
a lot of those casualties become, you said mind boggle, like, yeah, it all just becomes a bit of a blur. And then you can
Yeah.
read some of the personal accounts on an anecdotal level from soldiers, from citizens. And when it gets into that, they talk about, certain details that history escapes, or that escape history from time to time. Like the images on the ground from recon planes was just like bodies,
Hmm.
just bodies. The street was measured with different bodies instead of like by the normal landmarks. Because, by the way, bombing levels everything, so you can't tell like which district of the city you might be in.
Yeah.
But they would be like, well, the ones with the Russian bodies, like that's where we're off to. Or you'd be like, that's a street with all the German bodies, because they had nowhere to put them, or like we weren't dragging dead out of the streets in this crazy urban skirmishing to like put them in boxes and kindly clean them up.
Yeah. I
Just
mean, that's why,
imagining the hellscape that is that fight. They
yeah, that's
described it
why,
like poetically.
yeah, that's why all like the landmarks in Stalingrad are like Popov's house and the grain elevator and stuff. It's like those are the only things that are prominent enough that you can use them as a landmark. Like nobody's talking about Third Street anymore, or Main Street because it's all just rubble, and that's the only thing that you have to like go off of.
Yeah, the kids dug up the rest of it and put tank traps in there. So we're
Yeah,
trying to
right.
rebuild the trench over on 3rd Street. Yeah,
Yeah.
like that. And then now the echo of that lives, but Stalingrad's still a city, right? Like they rebuild, and this is all after World War II, but like, I don't know, man. The town we grew up in and stuff, or that area, if that was just ravaged.
Yeah, what's it called? What is Stalingrad called now? Is it Volgograd? I think it's
Ah,
Volgograd. Yeah.
oh,
Yeah,
they didn't keep
Volga.
the name? Why?
Nope.
What happened?
That's a different episode.
Oh no!
But
Get this one
yeah.
for the old Stalin Gipper.
I mean, don't worry, Vinny. The Soviet government does eventually fall, but don't worry, they replace it with something much better.
I can't wait.
Well, on that note, we'll go ahead and close out this week's episode of Uninformed Summary. Thank you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you, Matt, for covering that for us. If you want to follow Matt, you can follow Matt on Twitter at Matchroll20. You can follow Molly at Molly. You can follow me at That One Loud Guy, and you can follow Vinny at Fred Durst.
This is World War III. What you're doing?
We now have a website, which is
fucking face tonight. Give me something to break.
Something to break.
That's
Oh
right.
my God, that was perfect. You guys were right on time. Hey, I quit the podcast forever. So.
I do want to say we actually have a working website now
Woo!
that actually went live this week. So you can check that out at uninformedstudios.com. So if there is a person or a topic that you want us to cover, comment below, or you can go to the Contact Us page on the website, or you can send us an email at info@uninformedstudios.com. And stay tuned. See maybe if we cover one of your guys' suggestions. I know Matt says that he's not taking any suggestions, but I'm done with Alexander Hamilton, and I need ideas.
If people make the right suggestions, I will do their suggestions. But
No.
I'm not doing nonsense.
You hear that? You better cut the mustard.
Oh, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
Don't forget
Yeah,
to
you don't
like
wanna-
and subscribe.
Right.
Thank-
Don't forget it.
Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you've become a little less uninformed. Good night.
Bye.
I could say like this is mostly based on Stalingrad by Antony Beevor, but like most of the listeners aren't going to know who that is because they're not historians. So like I just might as well be making up a name, right? So like if they want to go read it, then put it in the notes so they can go read it. But like I don't think it makes for entertaining podcasting.
I feel like if you were going to make up a source, it would easily be my source? Oh yeah, it's author Antony Beevor.
Not Beevor. That's too like doesn't sound like a real name.
Yeah.
So I'll
It's
change
not-
the spelling up a little bit. Beevor. Yeah. It's not Beevor. It's not Beevor. It's not that I just looked over to my right and saw my kid's toy Beevor. It's Beevor. Beevor. Antony Beevor.
I'm a professional businessman.
who does business.
I'm here on business.
I'm Anthony Beevor.